Well, my name is Amalia, and I'm writing a book called The Fall of Delagiel, which is about the dialectic of the sacred and profane, but the vehicle is a tale of high adventure, espionage, and murder most foul. Now, I say that phrase a lot, the thing I just said, and it's because it's the best description of the book. It's a science fiction novel, you could say, although it has none of the hallmarks of science fiction as far as the narrative goes. The science fiction element is that there is a naturally occurring antibiotic that people have access to. Otherwise, everything in the world is the same as our own world. It's a lot of hours. First of all, I thought of the idea 10 years ago, and I've been thinking about the idea for a decade. I started writing it multiple times and then threw away everything I'd written over and over again. It wasn't until last year that I actually was happy with anything I wrote. So the idea had a lot of time to form before I was able to ever put pen to paper. Or type on the computer, actually. But I tend to work in the middle of the night. Everyone else is asleep. I sit at my computer typing for hours. I tend to write in binges where I'll write like 50 pages over the course of a couple weeks and then not write anything for a couple weeks. I made an outline that included a brief description of the 13 chapters. If anything, it's social critique, and one of the things that I was interested in doing with the book is showing how, beyond control of the characters, the people who are the poorest segment of society are continually exploited by those at the top. I guess I would say the moral is that life isn't fair. I would say that there are a lot more parallels to reality than that. There's certain cultural elements. The book is not set in our world. It's set in a world with very different cultures. These cultures are not in harmonious accord with each other. There are wars that happen, but each culture is unlike anything on Earth in some way. There are parallels, though. For instance, one of those cultures has a caste system similar to modern-day India, where there are castes within the society, some of which are more prestigious than others. So that has a parallel to the real world, because most cultures have social stratification that is somewhat economic in basis. So there are many parallels, but the book is an exploration of this dichotomy of the sacred and profane, and in every culture there is something about that in the book. So every culture has this dichotomy: this is sacred, this is profane. But that's not really true in the book. There's no magical, supernatural things going on. It's all the people's perception. So it's very much about the people's perception and not about magic. So what I would say is that has parallels in our world as well. You know, we go around considering some things to be clean, some things to be unclean. We'll put, you know, we wouldn't leave food on the floor because the floor isn't clean. The church is sacred. You know, there's people who won't curse inside a church or use foul language of any kind. So we have this dichotomy in our society as well. It's mostly about a war between two religions, although it doesn't start out as a war. It starts out as espionage, turns into a war.
Okay.
Well, I'm gonna
You can take any parts.
Okay, I'm gonna interpret your question to mean how does the book's treatment of the presence of this naturally occurring antibiotic, which is a commodity in the book, causes wars, and how that relates to the modern pharmaceutical industry. What I would say about that is that when you have medicine that people sorely need, then any people will do anything to get it. And if that is put economic pressures on or go to war over, that's true in our world as well as theirs. people need medicine. So if a culture has a monopoly on the type of medicine, then the other people will do anything to get that medicine, which is one of the major plot thrusts of the book, is just the drive for the antibiotic is only being produced in one place. So they have, in that culture, complete control over the production of it, and anyone else has to pay exorbitantly to get it. They have a monopoly. Yeah, there's two main characters, and they are, well, in a way there's three, although one character you barely ever see. The main character is named Burabai, and he is sort of like, if you can imagine the CIA, he is an agent in an organization that is not unlike the CIA. And his job is to go and steal the technology to make the drug that everyone needs so badly. For the Empire, who is not the culture who has the drug. Mousefoot, who is his best friend, is a thief and smuggler who he takes along with him on the mission. There's also the leader of the Empire, the ruler, who is the Empress, and between Mousefoot and the Empress is the dialectic of the sacred and profane. So Mousefoot is an untouchable. She is the lowest caste of their society. The Empress is absolutely the highest. So Burabai, in trying to find a space in between them, is exploring these extreme opposites. And much of the book is about him trying to choose between these two things that, in his mind, are opposites. Okay, so one of the other things that I've done is I've drawn a lot of images of the architecture in the book because it's pretty different than our own architecture. And if you turn the camera around, there's one hanging on the wall behind my interviewer, if you wanted to show the camera.
Yeah, I'll probably take pictures and put it over.
Okay. And in one way of looking at the book is that it's about the destruction of this utopia. So there's one culture that has the drug, everyone else is trying to get it. In the process of that, they destroy this city that is as close to a utopia as could be imagined. But because they have a monopoly on this drug, everyone is against them in some way, especially the Empire, and they go to war and the city gets destroyed. In a way, the city is a character in the book. Someone told me once that the best way to write a book is to create a lovable character and then destroy their life. So that's what I'm doing with this city, Delagiel, which is the title of the book. Fall of Delagiel refers to that. The city is beautiful. They have festivals every night. The people are all healthy and happy. They are the richest city in the world. They don't go to war because they don't have to, because they have so much money. Everyone is trying to get their cultural products all the time because they have a cultural hegemony over the surrounding lands. And in the book, the city is lovable, I think. At least I think I make it come across. Like, anyone who's read it has always said, I want to live there. So destroying that was part of the main thrust of the book, and that was the character who I was destroying, was the city. There is a total of 3 books I have planned. One of them is already written, and I'm in very last editing stage. The second one, which is a prequel, is what I'm writing now, and then I have a third book that totally has an outline and is totally planned, and then a 4th book that I'm kind of thinking of writing, but I haven't decided. I won't know till the end of the second book. Each book talks about the same series of events, but is from a different character's point of view. So the first book is from Burabai's point of view. He's the CIA agent, or call it CIA because I don't want to have to explain their government structure. The second book is about the Empress. It's called Rise of the Empress, and it's how she came to be in power in the Empire, and she's directly responsible for the destruction of the utopia of Delagiel. So how she goes from being the second ignored child of the previous ruler to being the most powerful person politically on the planet. And then that's the second book. The third book is about Mousefoot, the Untouchable, and her vengeance on the Empire after Burabai's death. So it's the only book where the main character doesn't die at the end. is the third book. Well, see, I've given everything away now, but most of my books that I plan on writing end with the death of the main character. I started writing the book when I was in college. Or not writing, but I came up with the idea in college, and then it took me 10 years to come, like I said before, it took me 10 years to get to the point where I was writing it. And it's the best thing I've ever done. I went to college for art. Anything I did in my undergraduate art, or anything I did outside of the book, is not as good as the art I am making and the book, like, as a whole. The drawings I've done in combination with the writing, I think, is the best work that I've ever made in my life. And that is a good feeling, certainly. Not that I didn't like my work before, but I'm proud of what I've done, I would say. And I think that, the next step is publishing, which I've never tried to publish a book before, so we'll see how that goes. But everyone who's read it has said I should try to get it published. So my next step is trying to get a literary agent and, trying to get them to sell the book to publishing companies. And then hopefully someday I can get the first book published, and then they'll want to publish the other parts of the series. So I had this idea for the book, and then I ended up running it as a dice game where you could be a person inside this world, and it's based on the world of the book, except I used Dungeons and Dragons rules, so you have access to magic and all those things that aren't present in the book world. So I changed it to be the game world, and the game takes place 75 years after the events of the book, so they won't affect the events of the book, but the way the game helps me is that people talking about the subject matter in their own voice makes it so that when I write dialogue, it doesn't sound all the same all the time. Before, when I was writing, every time I would write dialogue, all the characters sounded exactly the same. The thing that the game does for me is that hearing other people talk about the subject matter gives me ideas about the way characters would talk about the subject matter of the book. So I've run the games for a few years off and on, and people seem to enjoy it, although I think I enjoy it more than they do. And some of the characters have made it into the book. I had to completely change them in order to make it fit, but people have come up with names that I really liked, like there's an Untouchable who became a main character in the book that started out as a game character, named Patches, and I liked the way the character was created so much that I inserted them into the book, even though supposedly Patches shouldn't have been alive for another 75 years, but it really helps me develop the idea to have the game world be going at the same time. And people will give me ideas while they're playing the game. The fourth book, which is the one that I have the least planning on, I think will be the most depressing, which is one of the reasons I haven't totally decided if I'm going to write it or not. The third book will be the funniest, and that'll be the only one where the main character survives. But she's always been the most lovable character in my series, the one Mousefoot, the thief and smuggler, Burabai's best friend. And so I guess in some ways I'm most excited about writing the third book, because everyone who's read the books has agreed that Mousefoot is the most lovable character. So I think it'll be fun to do a whole book dedicated to her point of view.
Yeah, 4 books and ending on a tragic note.
The fourth book was going to be the hardest to write in some ways, because it wasn't part of the original plan of the series. It's something I've come up with later on. And, Hesham and the Disgraced, that's the fourth book. And I don't know if I'm ever going to write it, because terrible things happen to this man. He's a peripheral character in the other books. And I'm not sure I'm up to the task of writing it from his point of view.
Yeah, tragedy.
it would be, all the books are a tragedy except the Mousefoot book. This would be much more of a tragedy than the others.
Just morbid shit.
Yeah, I mean, he deserves everything that happens to him because he's the villain of the third book. But the main character of the second book was the villain of the first book. The Empress is the villain in the Burabai book, which is the first book. And then she gets a book dedicated to herself. In the third book, Mousefoot is trying to get vengeance for Burabai's death by taking down the Empire. The guy who's in charge of the Empire after the Empress's death is the villain of that book, and so the fourth book, if I followed the same logic, would be about that villain. But he's a much more... His life is not as fun to write about. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to do that.
Okay.
This interview is over!
Okay.
Rah!